Have you ever felt powerless? Watched your dignity trampled under the boots of those who claim to rule you? Picture the colonist's life. A poor farmer bent over frozen soil. A mother clutching a starving child. A militiaman left bleeding in the mud while English generals drink to their victories. Merchants of the crown grow fat on betrayal, while honest men pay with their children's hunger. This is not freedom. This is humiliation. They tell us to bow, to accept chains disguised as law. But what is law without justice? What is empire without sacrifice? Ours never theirs? Have you ever wondered how much a patriot can endure before the fire of rebellion ignites? Stay with me until the end. What you are about to hear may shock you, because in the ashes of grief, one man's wound will become a nation's call. This is the birth of a rebel. Welcome, my fellow patriots. From which city are you watching today? Check if you're already subscribed. Give this video a like. And now, let's begin our story. The terror of Ashmere Hollow had a face. Not the towering figure of a general astride a horse, nor the polished arrogance of a noble counting coins. It came instead in a small, twisted frame corporal Edward Hargrove, barely taller than a boy, yet feared more than men twice his size. The son of General Hargrove, wrapped in the protection of lineage and wealth, he carried the certainty of impunity in every step. He spoke of the king's cause, but his cause was hunger for power, and his weapon was humiliation. Farmers knew the sound of his boots before they saw him. Wives prayed he would pass their doors without stopping. Children hid at the sight of his scarlet coat. He knelt honest men in the mud just to feel taller. He laughed as he pressed their faces into filth. He stole daughters from hearths and left only silence behind. His stature was small, his cruelty immense. Elias Turner felt the weight of Hargrove's shadow long before he ever stood before him. He had already buried a father abandoned by the crown, already lowered into the earth the body of his own child, taken by hunger when Redcoat seized the grain meant for winter. Survival. Yet insult was not finished with him. The little corporal brought disgrace to Elias's own kin. One evening, beneath a cold moon, Hargrove raided Ashmere Hollow once more. He dragged neighbors by their collars, mocked their poverty, spat on their pleas. He called them rebels, though they held no muskets, only broken tools and empty bowls. When Elias's sister cried for mercy, the Redcoat forced her to the ground, grinding his boot upon her hand until bones cracked. The sound etched itself into Elias's soul deeper than any musket shot. That night, Elias felt the chains tighten around every colonist's neck. It was not just his grief any longer, not only his shame. It was the insult of a nation. Each act of degradation stitched together the fabric of rebellion. Dignity bled, yet it refused to die. In every child's scream, in every widow's silence, the seed of liberty pressed against the soil of despair. The people whispered of justice, but fear ruled their tongues. They watched. Neighbors dragged away, farms set aflame, elders kicked aside by red-coated boots. They bowed their heads not out of loyalty, but survival. And yet beneath that silence the fire grew. Elias saw it in their eyes, the trembling rage of men stripped of land, the hidden truth that no empire can forever suppress a soul longing for independence. Corporal Hargrove believed himself invincible. He strutted through Ashmere Hollow as if it were a stage built only to display his cruelty. But arrogance blinds. What he failed to see was the transformation taking shape in the heart of those he oppressed. Elias was no longer only a grieving carpenter's son. He was becoming something else, sharper than grief, stronger than despair. The wound was still open, but it had begun to harden into resolve. Every insult turned into weapon. Every betrayal became reason. Freedom was no longer a dream whispered in the dark. It was a necessity carved by pain, demanded by sacrifice. The struggle was not abstract. It had a name, a face, a crimson coat, and a sneer too smug to imagine defeat. Elias's journey was no longer about survival. It was about dignity, about claiming a future where children would not starve under the weight of another man's flag. The path ahead was soaked in uncertainty. Choices would come that no man could escape. Decisions that would tear him from the life he once knew and thrust him into a storm of fire. Revelation waited on the horizon, heavy as thunder. His wound was not only personal, it was the mark of a people rising, And so, as the night closed around Ashmere Hollow, Elias Turner walked into the darkness with his grief sharpening into something unrecognizable. The hour of reckoning had not yet struck, but every heartbeat carried him closer to it. The gate at Stonebrook groaned under winter wind when Abigail Carter knocked. Not a timid sound, a mother's demand. Her dress was torn, her hands raw from running, her eyes lit with a grief that would not be. Hushed, he took my girl Hope, 17. The name struck Elias like a bell. His lost child answered inside him. Grief answered. Rage answered. Something older than his years rose in his chest, the stubborn oath that humiliation would never again be law on this land. Elias drew her in from the cold. No speeches. No ceremony. Rebecca Turner was already spreading maps across the table-old trading paths, creek bends, bridle trails that didn't exist on any royal chart. She moved with the steadiness of a healer and the precision of a surveyor, a compass hanging at her neck, a knife at her belt. Jonah Pike stood in the doorway like a shadow, the quiet wheelwright, with hands that could mend anything and break what refused to mend. Matthew Hale hovered near the hearth, sharp-eyed and hollow-cheeked, a farm boy with the patience of a hunter and the courage of someone who had already buried too much. Abigail spoke around the shiver in her breath. Hargrove's men had come at dusk. They called it a levy, they called it inspection. They dragged girls into the lane under lantern light, while a fat merchant watched from his carriage, tallying grain seized and lives ruined. An officer signed a paper. A noble laughed into a velvet sleeve. No one would admit the insult because paper made it neat and signatures made it civilized. Elias listened to the small details, the torn ribbon, the muddy imprint of a boot on a doorstep, the smell of rum from the corporal's breath. Each detail was a nail. Each nail a reason. Rebecca traced a route with chalk. He favors the South Road when he wants to flaunt his power, she said. But when he wants secrecy, he vanishes into the birch marsh behind the Carter place. There's a hunter's bridge-rotted planks. Narrow span. If he's moving a stolen girl, he'll take the marsh to avoid the village. Her tone held no panic, only the arithmetic of survival. She marked the ridge where musket fire would echo and confuse. She marked the hollow where horses would shy. She marked the place a small tyrant might believe himself invisible. Jonah laid out tools wrapped in sacking, a smith's hammer, iron spikes, a length of chain he had sharpened into teeth. He said little. When he finally spoke, it was to the map. Here, he murmured, 2 blows on the bridge supports. Not enough to send men to drowning, enough to slow them, enough to force a decision. The word hung decision, the thing that divides men from cowards. The fork where independence either grows or withers. Matthew described lantern signals the militiamen had tested in secret. 1 blink for sighting, 2 for direction, 3 for danger. Simple. Because fear steals memory and fancy plans die in the first smoke. He looked to Abigail. If he took the marsh, I'll find the trace. He drinks. He stumbles. He leaves stumbling tracks. His voice carried that brittle pride born from being called nothing by those who command everything. Dignity is sometimes a whisper that refuses to go silent. Elias felt the room tighten into a single purpose. Not vengeance alone. Rescue. Salvage of honor. The rescue of a life, and of something larger than one life. He remembered the Crown's ledgers that made his father's death a footnote. He remembered the little mound where his son lay. He thought of Hope Carter, 17, and the Redcoat who made sport of disgrace to feel taller. The oppressor was blood of a general, shielded by gold and indifference. The victim was a girl with a name that sounded like a prayer. Betrayal had never been plainer. They moved. No drums, no banners. Independence doesn't always march. Sometimes it slips like a knife through brush. Snow fell in delicate whirls, softening the world, muting hoofbeats, turning breath into ghost. The road to the birch marsh cut low, a pale scar across black earth. Far off, in a manor house, a wealthy agent of the Crown counted debts by candlelight. In a warm barracks, officers rolled dice and toasted a king who had never seen. Ashmere Hollow. Their comfort was made of other people's hunger. Their laughter rested on other people's backs. Rebecca led them along the dear path that old hunters swore by. She read the ground as if it were scripture. A snapped twig. A smear of red wax. The scar of a spur on the bark. Hargrove's trail. Elias tightened his grip on the musket that had belonged to his father. He thought about law that crushes, about order that excuses degradation, about the quiet transformation by which a farmer stops apologizing for surviving and begins to demand the right to live. The hidden truth is never complicated. No empire grants humanity. Humanity is taken back, inch by inch, with resolve and sacrifice. At the marsh edge, Matthew flattened to the ground and lifted 2 fingers. Lantern glow flickered beyond the reeds. Voices drifted, coarse, slurring, entitled. One bragged about a general's table. Another complained of frozen boots and demanded more rum. Then a sharper tone cut through them. Corporals. Even muffled, it carried the sting of contempt. He barked orders as if striking with a whip. The men laughed, but their laughter had that thin edge that comes when cruelty passes for courage. Rebecca slid a coil of rope to Jonah and pointed to the bridge's far post. Jonah's hammer rose and fell once, a dull heartbeat. He worked like a craftsman, even at midnight, even for sabotage. Not rage, technique. The bridge trembled. Another blow. He wedged the tooth chain along the planks. Anything crossing fast would meet steel. Anything crossing slow would lose advantage. Choice again, and the reckoning that follows choice. Elias crawled forward through cattails until he could see the silhouettes. Hargrove stood with his back to the stars, small against the sky and somehow larger for it, as if malice could grow a man beyond his frame. Beside him, Hope Carter's hands were bound, but her chin was raised. She met the dark as if daring it to blink first. The sight cut him to the quick. His heart hammered against bone, not from fear, from the brutal clarity that some journeys have only 2 roads, surrender or uprising. He signaled Matthew. 1 blink, then 2. The marsh answered with a hush that felt like prayer. Elias breathed once, heavy with memory, and stepped into the open. No grand speech, only a voice that carried. Let her go. It was not a request. It was the sentence a people deliver when patience ends. Hargrove turned, surprise curling into a smirk. He recognized Elias. He sneered as if seeing a stray dog daring to bare teeth. The king's business, he said. He waved a sealed paper, a merchant's signature fat with ink and arrogance, as if documents could baptize crime into duty, as if a seal could erase shame. He gestured for his men to cross. The first redcoat put a boot on the planks. The bridge shuddered. He hesitated. The second cursed and pushed past, pride louder than sense. The chain bit. The wood groaned. Men stumbled. Torches dipped. Shadows leapt. The night itself seemed to take sides. In the confusion, Hope turned her wrist against the rope, blood shining where it cut. Rebecca's knife flashed from the reeds, a single clean motion, the healer becoming guardian. Jonah's hammer answered a musket spark with iron on iron. Matthew's shot cracked the cold. Not to kill, but to force heads down, to buy breath. Everything narrowed. Not battle, judgment. Elias saw Hargrove's eyes flick to the water, to the posts, to the faltering bridge. He saw calculation. He saw the cowardice behind cruelty, the tiny heart inside the redcoat. And he understood the revelation that changes a man. Tyranny is not a mountain. It is a mask. And once the mask slips, even a small tyrant trembles. Elias leveled his musket. The moon climbed a finger's breadth. Hope stumbled toward the reeds, hands free, breath ragged but unbroken. Abigail's whisper carried over the marsh like a thread pulling a child home. The men of the crown found their footing and raised their barrels. Decisions throbbed in the air like drums. On one side, a general's son with paper shields. On the other, farmers and widows and boys who had learned patience the hard way. Independence poised between trigger and heartbeat. Snow ticked against the cattails. The bridge creaked again. Words gathered in Ilias's throat, the kind a nation remembers or forgets. He did not yet speak them. Not yet. The night held its breath, and the next step would mark the line between disgrace endured and dignity reclaimed, between silence that obeys and a rebellion that will not bow. Mud remembers. It remembers the weight of a man forced to kneel, the taste of clay and iron, the scrape of a boot grinding dignity into earth. Years ago, Elias Turner learned that lesson with the whole village watching. A loyalist merchant arrived with an emergency levy, a lie written on expensive paper. Elias refused. He asked for fairness, not favor. He spoke of lawful measure, not plunder. Disguised as duty, Hargrove answered with spectacle. "Kneel," the corporal ordered, voice bright with contempt. Officers laughed. A wealthy patron counted coins, amused by courage that cost another man's blood. Hargrove pressed a musket muzzle to Elias's skull while a soldier pinned his shoulders. Boots on his neck, spit in his hair. The crowd swallowed hard because survival makes witnesses quiet. Elias swallowed mud because living gives time to repay debts. That day, shame burrowed into him. Like a live coal, it did not fade. It forged. Now the marsh waited for judgment. Hargrove faced him across the failing bridge. The same smirk, the same borrowed power. Snow drifted. Horses snorted. The planks trembled. Hope Carter clutched the reeds, wrists raw but free, eyes steady. Rebecca's knife glinted low. Jonah's breath came slow, a smith's bellows metered for work. Matthew's hands were rock on the stock. Abigail's lips moved over a prayer that sounded like a pledge. Elias did not pretend. The past was gone. He felt it like a bruise under winter clothes. That humiliation had taught him the hidden truth of empire, ruin written as policy, cruelty as procedure, betrayal as bookkeeping. He had lived, yes, but a part of him had been left face down in that dirt. Tonight was not revenge alone. It was reclamation. It was the stubborn insistence that liberty belongs to the poor as much as to nobles with silks and seals. It was the answer to the boot that once stood on his neck. He stepped forward until the water lapped at his boots. He spoke without ornament. "Release the girl. Leave our land. No threat. Verdict." Hargrove tilted his head, all sneer and pedigree. "On your knees," he replied, as if ritual could be repeated until a nation forgot its spine. He raised the musket not to shoot, to display, to stage the same theater of degradation. One of his men chuckled. The fat merchant's signature swung like a charm from a leather cord. Proof of purchase, proof of rot. Elias remembered the exact weight of that barrel long ago, the cold ring against skin, the stunned silence of neighbors. He remembered deciding to live because dying in pride would feed his wife nothing and warm no child. That decision had cost him. Tonight demanded another choice. Not reckless heroics. Calculated courage. The struggle for independence is not thunder. It is a series of clear, relentless decisions. "Jonah," Elias murmured. The hammer tapped once. The bridge answered with a split of wood. The redcoat at the front lurched, cursed, and grabbed a rope. Torches jerked. In that jerk, arrogance faltered. Elias lifted his own weapon. His voice carried like a bell struck hard. "This ground is not yours. This girl is not your property. Your paper is ash." Hargrove's smile thinned. He flicked his eyes to the marsh, remembering, perhaps for the first time, that nature does not recognize rank. His finger tightened. In the same heartbeat, Matthew's next shot snapped a lantern wick. Darkness pushed closer. Rebecca's low whistle drew Hope sideways along the bank to cover. Abigail's hands reached. Mercy has calluses. Then came the sound Elias had dreaded since the levee years, the gasp of villagers gathering at a distance, pulled by noise and memory, by curiosity and fear. Faces rose from the brush farmers in patched coats, gray-haired men with canes, boys too young for war and too old for ignorance. The oppressor loves an audience. Humiliation is theater. But the people of Ashmere Hollow were not the same congregation of silence as before. Their eyes were different now. The degradation of seasons had changed them. The famine, the seizures, the soldiers at doors. Something in their stare said the age of bending had thinned to a thread. Hargrove heard it too. He raised his chin, trying to look tall. Witnesses, he gloated, reaching for old power. The king's cause. The phrase broke as the bridge popped a second time. He swore. He flung the paper at the dark as if parchment could float him over truth. One redcoat fired high in panic. Bark exploded from a birch. The echo rolled up the ridge and came back larger, as if the land itself condemned the shot. Elias did not fire. Not yet. The lesson of his prior shame was patience. The transformation inside him was not a shout. It was a bell that would not stop ringing. "You forced me to kneel once," he said, voice low, meant for the colonist as much as for the corporal. "I lived. I carry that dirt with me. Tonight I return it." He let a handful of marsh mud fall from his fist into the black water. A small rite. A burial of disgrace. A beginning. Hargrove spat. "Dog." He thrust his musket forward, sighted. then flinched as his boot slipped on iron teeth. He grabbed a post, wrenching his shoulder. The mask ripped. For a breath, the untouchable sun looked very breakable. A revelation rode the cold. Tyranny bleeds like any man. The soldiers behind him saw it too. Their swagger shrank. Their eyes lost certainty. When authority hesitates, courage migrates. Elias felt the hollow swell behind him. Quiet folk inching closer, their caution balanced by an older duty. An elder stepped out with a walking stick, face carved by winters, voice cracked but steady. "You heard the man," he told the redcoats. "This is our soil, not a rally. A statement of ownership. A deed written in memory and graves." The merchant in the road called for restraint, as if the word could hide theft. He spoke of order, of balance of necessities determined in townhouses far from hunger. "Betrayal wears perfume. It still stinks," Elias answered with silence. "Better than any argument." He pointed to Hope. Rebecca guided the girl behind Jonah's wide shoulders. Abigail wrapped her shawl around the child's bare arms. Protection first. Pride second. That is how nations endure. Hargrove shook his pain away and leveled his weapon again, rage hardening what fear had softened. He would not retreat in front of peasants. He would replay his favorite ritual, boots on the neck, a man in mud. He gestured to his men. "Take him." The order landed dull. The first soldier looked at the waterline, then at the villagers, then at the bridge that bit. He hesitated. The second cursed the cold. The third muttered that the general's son could fetch his own trophies. Decisions multiplied. On both sides. Elias knew one misstep could drown them all in blood. But the hour had come when independence is not argued. It is declared by action. He drew a deeper breath, the kind a father takes before lifting more than his frame should. His next movement would write itself into memory, for good or for ruin. He shifted his stance, planted his feet, set his cheek to the worn stock that had belonged to a man the crown never compensated, and found Hargrove in the notch of iron. The marsh hushed, horses stilled, snow stitched white threads through the air. Somewhere a child sobbed once and then swallowed it, learning early what endurance costs. Elias's heartbeat was a drum. Not for glory, for resolve. He remembered the kneeling. He remembered the laughter. He remembered swearing that insult would never again be law. A whisper moved through the colonists, as fragile as frost, as strong. It sounded like one word with many names: liberty, honor, self-respect, home. The word that mends a bowed back and straightens it. The word that carries families across winters. The word that turns a farmer into a citizen. Elias did not lower his barrel, not this time. He let the old shame guide his aim, not cloud it. The next breath would tip the world. The bridge creaked as if counting. 1, 2, and in that count, the line sharpened between obedience and defiance, between a life ruled by contempt and a future wrested back by courage. Comment: I stand with the Patriots. Dawn bled gray into the trees as they took the ironwood trail. The snow there was darker, laced with soot. Birds kept silent. Even the brook moved quietly, as if water feared to draw notice. Rebecca walked ahead with her compass hidden in her palm. Jonah carried the hammer under his coat. Matthew scanned prints that zigzagged like guilt. Abigail kept close to Hope, every step a prayer stitched into motion. Elias felt the woods lean in to listen. They smelled the ruin before they saw it. Char and tallow, wet ashes. A cottage reduced to ribs of beam and blackened stone. The door was a shape on the ground. The hearth a mouth filled with cinders. On the fence, a scrap of blue ribbon trembled. It clung to a splinter as if refusing to abandon the place. Matthew found another piece near a shattered milk pail, soaked and stiff. He didn't speak. He just held it out. Hope touched it, and her breath hitched once, a thin thread of sound. Elias took the ribbon and wrapped it around his wrist. A small oath. A reminder that memory has color. They found the grave under a skim of crusted snow. Shallow, hasty, the kind dug by hands that fear witnesses. Rebecca knelt and brushed away the ice with her sleeve. Someone had laid bits of charred thatch over the disturbed earth, as if to hide an insult under the same roof that had burned. Abigail's jaw set. Jonah looked toward the road and then back at the mound, a man measuring the distance between helplessness and duty. Elias set his musket aside and dug with his bare hands, not to expose but to mend what indecency had mangled. They did not speak names aloud. Some names hurt the air. They widened. The resting place made it worthy. Cold bit their fingers. Dignity warmed them more than any fire. When the ground was right, Elias stepped back and waited until every eye found him. Snow drifted in slow, hushed spirals. He spoke in a voice meant for the living and the gone. "We are not wolves, we are a people." The words sat in the pines like frost. They want us to mirror their brutality, to answer disgrace with blind rage, so they can call our hunger savagery and their theft order. We will not give them that. We bury our dead as citizens. We stand as neighbors. We keep our pledge to the soil that raised us and to the children who must walk after us. He looked at Hope, at the purple marks on her wrists. He looked at Abigail, face cold and fierce, a mother after nights without sleep. He looked at Jonah, whose silence carried a weight heavier than iron, and at Matthew, whose thin shoulders had learned too young how to carry grief. "Independence is more than powder and shot," Elias said. "It is the refusal to let shame become law. It is the stubborn defense of honor against men who count with ledgers and bayonets. It is the decision, day after day, to remain human while they trade humanity for rank." They lowered a small bundle of charred cloth and bone into the earth. Wrapped in a cloak Rebecca had kept from a kinder winter. No name. A life. Hope pressed the blue ribbon over the cloak and closed her eyes. Abigail covered the ribbon with a handful of soil and whispered something, too soft for any ear but heaven. Jonah replaced the earth with careful strokes, each one an act of quiet rebellion. Matthew planted 2 sticks in the shape of a cross and tied a length of twine between them. Simple as breath, enduring as sorrow. The wind shifted. Hoofprints cut the road beyond the burned fence, sharp and recent. The path of riders who lingered only long enough to ruin and vanish. Hargrove's trace, unmistakable. The narrow stride, the arrogant rake of the tracks. A place where a mount had kicked at a door for sport. Elias studied the marks as a man studies handwriting. Cruelty has a signature. It repeats itself. From the ashes they lifted what could be saved. A skillet warped like a shield, a tin cup blackened but whole, a child's wooden spoon scorched on one end. Artifacts of ordinary life. Proof that conquest feeds on the simple, daily courage of the poor. Rebecca tucked the spoon into her bag. "For the ledger of truth," she said, "records matter when liars rule." A figure emerged from the trees, a gray-bearded farmer with a limp, hat crushed in his hands. He had watched from the dark, afraid to hope. He told them through chapped lips how the Redcoats had come with a wealthy factor in furs, how the merchant had held a list of levies while soldiers emptied bins and kicked a cradle from its stand. The officer read charges: hoarding, sedition, failure to tithe. Fines doubled in a breath. Punishments tripled with a shrug. When the family begged the corporal smiled and ordered the house fired to discourage rebellion. The man showed them his palms, blistered and useless. "I tried," he said, shame burning hotter than frostbite. Elias grasped those hands, held them hard. "The guilt is theirs," he answered. "All of it." They prayed without formality, each in their own way. Hands joined, hats off, faces lifted to a sky that felt closer for the smoke. When the final clump of earth fell, Elias straightened, and the company rose with him. The grave was not an end, it was a witness. The ashes on the road were not silence, they were testimony. The ribbon on his wrist glowed against the winter pallor, a small flag that no empire could confiscate. He turned to the gathered few whose breath made clouds. "Hear me." His voice did not strain. It held steady like a plumb line. "We will not become what they are. We will fight, yes. We will break their chains and deny their right to grind us down. But we will not trade our souls for victory. Our struggle is not for the joy of striking back. It is for the birth of a nation where a cottage is safe, where a child's ribbon does not end in smoke, where the poor are not fodder for a general's son." He let the vow settle, weighty and plain. "We do not hunt, we defend, we reclaim." The graybeard nodded, tears gathering in the creases. A boy at his side, thin, shaking, fierce, stepped closer with a musket too long for his arms. "Take me," he said. Matthew rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You'll watch the ridge, not the road. Watch the ridge." The boy swallowed the assignment like bread. Responsibility is a meal when hunger is all you know. They set a marker at the cottage path and heaped stones around it, a cairn for truth. Rebecca sketched the scene into her chart. the grave, the ruin, the hoofprints bending south toward a bend in the trail named only by old hunters. She added a single word near the margin: oath. Jonah fitted the warped skillet onto his pack. For soup when we carry her home, he said, meaning hope and also meaning something larger, a country not yet born. Elias led them back to the road. The pines sighed over their heads like the breath of elders listening. He felt the transformation inside him finish its turn, not a blaze but a steady flame. No more kneeling for ceremony. No more permission begged from men who sell permission by the pound. They had buried disgrace and raised a covenant. Betrayal had scorched the earth, but it had also clarified the journey. He touched the blue ribbon. Cold, bit deeper. Resolve burned brighter. Ahead, the ironwood trail narrowed and dipped, swallowed by alder and shadow. Hargrove's sign pointed toward a ravine and a mill road that ran behind the manor of a magistrate fond of feasts and careful blindness. Elias weighed choices. Paths forked. Some promised quick blood. Others promised patient justice. He knew the cost on every branch: sacrifice, danger, consequence. But the hidden truth had already declared. Itself in ashes and bone, there is no safe road back to chains. They moved, quieter than before, heavier, cleaner. Each footstep a clause and a declaration no parchment had yet carried. The forest absorbed them and kept their secrets, but the sky held their vow. Far off a bell clanged from Stonebrook, one slow stroke that might have been wind. It sounded like warning. It sounded like promise. Elias raised a hand, and the line halted at the lip of the ravine, where the tracks multiplied and the air tasted of smoke and iron. What came next would test the marrow of their pledge and ask whether a people can walk through fire and not come out changed. They found the deserter tangled in briars near the ravine, coat half torn, breath a thin rattle. A boy, really, cheeks raw with cold, eyes blown wide with the kind of fear that makes men run from their own shadows. Blood darkened the sleeve where a musket ball had grazed him. Matthew steadied the barrel while Rebecca knelt, quick hands, clean cloth. She pressed the wound, not gentle, but kind. "If I bind you, you keep quiet," she said. He nodded as if granted a pardon. Elias watched the tree line while Jonah cut the thorns away. Abigail stood over Hope, one arm around her, the other fixed on the path where riders might appear. Snow fell in the slow drift that makes noise carry strangely. Somewhere a branch snapped, then silence again. The deserter gulped air, shook once, and shivered into stillness. Rebecca slid her fingers into his inner pocket to pack more lint and felt paper slick with wax. A seal, an officer's mark. She frowned, turned her back to the wind, and worked the edge of her knife under the crest. The wax broke with a dull click. She read. Her face changed, not to shock but to a colder thing, understanding. She handed the letter to Elias without a word. He took it and saw the general's hand, curled, deliberate, iron disguised as grace. From headquarters of His Majesty's forces, it began. To all local commanders under my direction, you will tolerate the forays commanded by Corporal Edward Hargrove in the outlying settlements. These measures, though strict, are necessary to break colonial will and secure due submission. Complaints from provincials are to be recorded, not acted upon. Any magistrate hindering said operations will answer to my office. General A. Hargrove. Not madness. Mandate. A father's protection wrapped around a predator. Permission as policy. Elias felt the words settle into him like ice. The hidden truth stood naked. Disgrace had a uniform and a signature. Tyranny wore a family name. Abigail read over his shoulder and swore under her breath. Hope flinched at the general's seal, as if the wax were a hand closing. Jonah didn't curse. He took the letter as a smith weighs a tool, heavy with consequence. Matthew's jaw set. Boys learn fast when the world refuses mercy. Rebecca folded the paper with ritual care and slipped it into her map case. "This is the blueprint," she said. "Not a rogue. A system." Her voice was quiet enough to cut. "They will deny him nothing. They will deny us everything." She sketched a small emblem on the margin of her chart, a sign she reserved for treacheries that defined roads more surely than rivers. The deserter watched them, shame pooling in his eyes. "I carried it," he whispered, voice husky with cold and regret. "We were told to burn every copy after reading. I ran instead." He looked at the ground. "Corporal Edward," he said, "we'd teach you your place, that fear would make you trade dignity for bread." The boy swallowed. I thought war was glory. It tastes like ash. Elias crouched until they were eye to eye. Do you want to be used, he asked, or do you want to be a man? The question hung between them like a scale. The deserter closed his eyes a moment and exhaled. I want to stop them, not a boast, a plea to belong to something clean. Then you will point, Elias said. Roots, signals, which? Merchant opens his cellar when the redcoats knock. The lad nodded, eager and afraid. He spoke of a magistrate who dined with officers while widows waited outside for scraps. He named a warehouse where seized grain was weighed like gold. He described lantern codes from the manor stables, how 3 quick flashes meant the general's son sought entertainment, the word dropping from his mouth like poison. Each detail was a nail hammered into the coffin of excuses. Elias felt something in him, harden into purpose. The journey had stepped past personal grief. This was no longer a quarrel with one cruel man. This was an indictment of a power that made humiliation an instrument and called it order. Independence, he understood, would not be begged from such hands. It would be taken with steadiness, defended with sacrifice, sanctified by restraint. They moved out, the deserter between Jonah and Matthew, Rebecca leading them along a deer run that twisted under hanging hemlock. The ravine funneled wind like a horn. Voices carried. A patrol crossed the reach, a flash of scarlet, a noble's laughter edged with rum, the jangle of bridles owned by men who never tilled a furrow. The party passed without noticing the shapes below. Contempt had made them careless. Pride weakens eyes. At a bend where rock rose smooth and high, they paused. Elias pressed his palm to the cold face of stone and felt a steady thrum, his own blood in something else. A people waking. He looked to the company. This letter is proof, he said. We will not hide it. We will place it in every hand that doubts. We will make their design visible. When sunlight strikes deceit, men choose differently. Rebecca suggested a path to the printing shed in Stonebrook, a creaking press hidden behind sacks of flax where a schoolmaster and a widow set type by candlelight. Jonah offered to carry the plate if they cut one. Matthew already counted riders they would need to intercept. Abigail set her jaw in that way knew. Widows do in expectation, not despair. Hope reached for the ribbon on Ilias's wrist and touched it once, not asking permission, granting it. The ground tilted toward the mill road. Smoke braided with fog beyond the alders. The manor squatted on its rise, fat with stolen grain, windows like cold eyes. On the porch, a wealthy factor in fur spoke with an officer whose boots were cleaner than his deeds. They shared a laugh. Elias felt his teeth set. He remembered his father's unmarked grave, the debt books that never counted a carpenter's life. The day he was made to kneel for the amusement of men who called their sport discipline. He remembered it did not burn. He banked the heat, controlled fire cooks, heels, hardened steel. Wildfire devours the village first. Choices, he said softly. We will not be drawn into their theater. We will force them into light. He handed the letter to Rebecca again. She tucked it deep. We need the schoolmaster, she said, and witnesses who aren't. Ours, the elder from the hollow, the wheelwright's guild, the women who bake for both sides because children must eat. She looked at Elias. Truth must cross lines even when soldiers guard them. The deserter pointed toward a side path used by servants. It cut behind the smokehouse to a gate left unlatched for deliveries at dawn. He keeps trophies there, the boy murmured. Ribbons, rings, locks of hair. The words scraped. Hope's grip tightened on Abigail's sleeve. Rebecca's breath went sharp. Jonah's eyes went black with a fury that had to be harnessed or it would drown them all. Elias set a hand on Jonah's shoulder. We will take proof, he said. We will take breath back. We will not take what would make us them. He looked at Matthew. If we can free those kept there, we do it. If we cannot, we return with numbers and law, we right ourselves. Matthew nodded, understanding the oath inside the plan. They slid along the servants' track, bodies close to stone, steps timed with wind. A kitchen maid stepped out to dump peelings, saw them, and froze. Abigail raised a finger to her lips. The girl's eyes darted to Hope's bruised wrists, to the map case at Rebecca's side, to the deserter's torn coat. She made a small decision that would never be recorded in any royal ledger. She set the pail down and let the gate swing wider. Inside the yard, a line of laundry cracked in the cold aprons, shirts, a blue ribbon pinned like a captured bird. Hope's breath stuttered. Elias felt his own heart buck. He lifted the pin and placed the ribbon in Hope's palm. "No more trophies," he said. "No more souvenirs of pain." He heard boots beyond the door. Laughter, loud and unbothered. The men inside believed themselves untouchable. Generals protected their blood. Merchants laundered their sins with invoices and seals. Officers enforced the script. Yet the script had been read aloud now. The people had the pages. And once read, they cannot be unread. Elias touched the worn stock of his musket, then let his hand fall. Not yet. He breathed once, let the breath settle into the marrow of the vow they had made over ashes and grave. The next steps would define them, how they fight, how they spare, how they build a republic from wreckage without turning their souls into spoils. He turned to Rebecca, to Jonah, to Matthew, to Abigail, and Hope, to the deserter trembling but standing. He nodded toward the rear door and the smokehouse beyond, toward proof and rescue and the sharp edge. "Of consequence," Snow whispered. The gate clicked shut behind them. The world narrowed to courage and care, to light hidden in pockets, to a letter that had stripped the enemy of disguise. What waited inside would test every ounce of patience they owned and every inch of resolve they claimed. Right, the flame of freedom lives in me. The black finch smelled of smoke, yeast, and old sorrow. Chairs scraped like whispers. A single lantern swung above a scarred table, its light running over pewter. Mugs and the blade marks of lives lived close to the bone. Elias spread a rough map across the wood charcoal lines, grease smears, a thumbprint of ash. The manor squatted at the center like a fat spider. Trails radiated like web. Rebecca set her compass on the margin. Jonah placed his hammer beside it, iron speaking where words should not. Matthew leaned forward, eyes steady, a farm boy already aged by winter and war. Abigail stood behind Hope with a shawl around both, a mother's shelter and a witness's spine. The deserter hovered near the hearth, face pale, guilt like frost on his lashes. "No speeches," Elias said. "Only sacrifice." The room held the sentence the way a church holds silence. He traced the north cleft where the rock narrowed and funneled men like grain into a chute. Jonah blocks this, Elias decided. Felled timber, spiked chain, stones set to roll, not to crush, to stall, to force their choice. The wheelwright nodded once. He understood the language of weight and balance. He would make the hill say no. Elias tapped the west stream. A thin line, innocuous in summer, dangerous in thaw. "Rebecca takes this run," he said. "Sluice the gate. Flood the path. Turn their flank to muck. Horses hate doubt." Rebecca's fingers moved over the map, measuring distances they had walked since childhood. "I'll need the millwright's bar," she murmured, "and 3 hands who can lift without talk." She looked to the room. Rough palms rose. A widow, a cooper, the graybeard, from the ashes. Humbler ranks than any officer's list. Stronger for it. He marked the main gate with a dark square. "I strike here," Elias said, voice flat with resolve. Clean. Loud enough that they believe the push is singular. It was a risk. He would be seen. He would draw the blade. He would stand where his father might have stood had justice paid wages. Finally, he touched a scratch of rock south of the stables, a knife-thin fissure the deserter had described, a seam in the manors. "Foundation older than any seal. Matthew slips through here," Elias said. "Cut the fuses on the stolen powder. No fire. Only silence. We free the breath they thought to choke with smoke." The boy absorbed the order like meat at dawn. His jaw tightened. "If I'm caught," he said. "Simple as weather." Elias didn't flinch. "Then you fight your way back to light. And if you cannot, you make your last act deny them the blast." The tavern-goers shifted, fear rustling like straw. They had buried children, watched elders collapse under levies dressed as law. They had learned what discipline means when nobles define it. Humiliation had become ceremony, disgrace, a habit. Tonight, habit would be broken, not with rage alone, with design. Rebecca unrolled a second scrap, the printing shed's code for alarm and gathering. She tapped out short marks with a spoon on the table, 1 for sight, 2 for false retreat, 3 for proof in hand. The schoolmaster nodded from the corner, ink under his nails. Courage behind spectacles. He would set type the moment the letter was safe. Truth stamped in lead. Treason to tyrants. Medicine to the sick. The innkeeper's wife slipped bowls of stew along the edge and a loaf broken into moons. "Eat," she said. Hunger weakened sense. She had lost a brother to a levy and a son to fever brought by soldiers quartered without consent. She did not weep, she fed them. That is a kind of rebellion, too. Elias sketched the last line. A lane behind the smokehouse where a servant kept the gate loose at dawn. Hope touched the charcoal with 2 fingers. "There's a room," she whispered, "with bolts on the outside. The girls hear carts at night, wheels on stone, laughter." The word shame moved through the tavern like a cold wind. Men looked at the floor. Women stared hard at the door, as if willing it to open for those still locked behind it. "There will be betrayal," Rebecca said calmly. "Someone will carry word for coin or to save his own hide." She didn't. "Accuse," she prepared. "So we split time. No one man holds the whole clock." Jonah grunted approval. The deserter swallowed and lifted his hand. "There's a signal from the manor's loft," he offered. "A lantern behind blue glass when the corporal rides. 2 when the general's coach is near. Tonight there was 1. He paused. "There may be 2 by dawn." The schoolmaster drew a cross beside the fissure. "If the powder is damp, cut every cord anyway," he urged Matthew. "They will dry it." "It will." "Use it on our barns, our beds?" Matthew nodded. Decisions were beads. He slid them without noise. Elias looked to them all. "No glory," he said. "Only duty." He stood straighter, as if the word itself had set his spine. "We move at change of watch. We scatter if we fail. We gather if we hold. We carry proof to the press. We carry hope out if she can guide us. We carry anyone we find breathing. If we must bleed, we bleed on our feet. We will not kneel for their amusement." A murmur rose and fell. Like tide, not loud, certain, dignity resurfacing after years underwater, they checked straps and flints. Rebecca wrapped oilcloth around Matthew's knife. Jonah counted spikes by feel. Abigail laid a hand on Elias's sleeve. "Whatever happens," she said, "we keep the line. We do not turn into them." He covered her hand with his. "That is the oath." Hope lifted her chin. "I will not be cargo," she added. "I will be a witness." The girl's small voice weighed more than any officer's shout. Before they left, Elias turned his palm and someone placed the general's letter in it. The seal glinted like a crooked moon. He passed it to the schoolmaster. "Print it," he said. "Let every hearth read what they conceal. Let the magistrate choke on his own supper." The teacher pressed the page against his chest as if it burned and warmed at once. "We will set it in the morning," he promised, "if morning is given to us." The wind struck the tavern door when it opened, a blade of cold that made breath. Smoke. Men rose without clatter. Women tied scarves tight. The black finch emptied into the alley where barrels and slush made a narrow world. Elias felt the night take them in and harden their resolve. He saw the faces of the oppressed farmers with cracked hands, elders with shoulders bent by years of contempt, militia lads wearing hand-me-down courage. He also saw the faces of those who had dealt the insult officers lounging under borrowed authority, nobles counting spoils with rings that never touched soil, merchants writing betrayal as bookkeeping. He tasted the distance between the two and found it intolerable. They split along the routes their plan required. Jonah toward the north cleft with 3 men who knew stone. Rebecca and 2 mill hands toward the west stream, the iron bar on a pole like a standard for a quiet army. Matthew slipped into shadow with a coil of cord and a knife angled flat to catch no light. Elias walked alone for a dozen paces and then was not alone at all. The village moved with him in spirit, a host of names carved into memory by winter and want. Snow started again, thin and persistent. The kind that erases tracks if you do not keep moving. The kind that blankets graves and roads alike. Freedom hung in the air like that snow, near enough to taste, not yet ours, demanding every step be paid in resolve. Elias adjusted the strap on his musket, touched the blue ribbon on his wrist, and stepped into the corridor of bare trees that led to the gate. The lantern at the manor loft burned behind glass, a cold eye watching. Somewhere a clock struck. Somewhere a mother woke from a dream of a child calling. Somewhere a soldier laughed too loud. Elias did not hurry. He carried the pace of men who have decided and will not be turned. The plan lay over the land like a net. The people were the knots. If one strand broke, the others would hold. If all held, the web would tighten around the heart of a tyranny that mistook policy for destiny. The last lamplight of the black finch fell behind them. The path narrowed, the cold deepened. The line between obedience and defiance sharpened until it could cut a finger. Elias closed his hand around the stock and felt the past kneeling loosen its claws. The journey had taught him what kind of man he would be when fear called him by his old name. He answered with a new one. At the edge of the trees he lifted 2 fingers. Shapes flowed to ground, breath stilled. The gate ahead carried the weight of 1,000 small decisions poured into one hinge. He exhaled once, steady, and the night seemed to wait for their courage to define it. Dawn drew a knife edge of pale light across ironwood. Frost clung to the stones like breath held too long. Elias stepped from the tree line and let his voice carry clean and hard. Edward Hargrove faced men, not children. The hills threw the name back. Muskets answered from the parapet with arrogant cracks. Splinters leapt from the gate. Smoke blossomed. Blue-gray. Then the cave behind the manor vomited fire powder touched by panic. Sparks climbed the rock like angry bees. Deserters, jolted by their own blast, broke ranks and scattered straight into colonial sites set low and steady. Not slaughter, correction. Shots placed to break charge, not hope. A redcoat fell screaming, his pride louder than his pain. Another tossed his weapon and stumbled for the birches, hands high, history draining from his face. Rebecca's sluice groaned open upriver. Water churned through the west run and shouldered the road into muck. Horses shrieked and balked, their training no match for doubt underfoot. Jonah's chain bit the north cleft, a cart tipped. Stones rolled like judgment down a throat of granite. The manor yard buckled into confusion. Commands collided. Officers bellowed as if volume could erase consequence. A noble in fur slipped on his own polished step and crawled behind a column, dignity abandoned like a bad investment. Elias advanced, hat brim low, musket steady, the word rebellion beating in his chest like a drum that had finally found its cadence. Not wild fury, a cadence learned from grief. He saw the loft lantern flash, once a deadward sign, a cheap trick to make fear look organized. He answered with powder and motion. 2 of his men hewed the gate beam with axes borrowed from fields that had known better work. The bar splintered, hinges screamed. The passage yawned and breathed out a cloud of smoke and a single high cry from deep within, a girl's voice, sliced short by a shot that slapped the stone Matthews mark, precise and brutal. The kind that opens locks men swear are iron. Silence followed, heavy as a verdict. Then another cry, nearer. This time not terror, summoning. Inside, the corridor stank of stale ale and fear. Elias slipped along the wall, eyes tearing, lungs burning, ears hunting for the small sounds that matter. A chain dropped, a bolt scraped back, breath steadied by courage. He found the first door. Barred on the outside, he kicked the latch. The panel bucked. Jonah's shoulder finished the job. 3 girls stared into the smoke, eyes ringed with soot, hands bound but chins lifted. Abigail and Hope pulled them into the current of escape, wrapping shawls around shaking bones. Toward the alder line, Rebecca called from the yard, voice level amid chaos. Left of the trough, then down. Orders like anchor points on a map no tyrant could redraw. A redcoat lunged from a doorway, bayonet, thrusting for Elias's ribs with the tidy righteousness of Emmanuel. Elias parried with the barrel, slammed the man into stone, and let him slide into his own disgrace. Behind you, Matthew hissed from the fisher's seam. 2 more came at a crouch, veterans by the look of the eyes. The farm boy's knife flashed twice, quiet as a breath. Fuses lay severed in coils at his feet like snakes declawed. He had cut the cords, split the leads, soaked the spare powder with brine stolen from the smokehouse. The cave would spit nothing more. Across the yard, the general's letter burned under the schoolmaster's coat like a second heart. He ran with it behind the cooper, ducking through the broken gate, head low, purpose high. A lieutenant reached to snatch it and caught Jonah's hammer instead. Bone answered iron with a sound that emptied a man of commands. The ink would make it to the press. Policy would meet daylight. Betrayal would lose its disguise. Elias pushed deeper, room by room, bolt by bolt. Hands he didn't know touched his sleeve and vanished toward air. He heard a sob that grew teeth and turned into a growl. Not from him, from a people that had remembered its spine. He found a locked chest at the foot of a cot and split it with the axe a farmer had carried for wood, not war. Ribbons fell, out blue, red, a toddler's braid, rings wrapped in linen. names reduced to trophies. He poured the keepsakes into a sack and heaved it to Hope. She held it like a banner, proof heavy as iron. "No more," she said, voice hoarse and final. "No more." A shout ripped down the hall, sharp, personal. Edward Hargrove's snarl, small man made large by echo. Turner. The name curdled on his tongue. He stepped from smoke with a pistol and the old sneer, command sewn onto him like a stolen coat. "On your knees." It was the ritual he loved, humiliation as ceremony. The pistol lifted. The barrel found the memory of a skull once pressed to earth. The old shame moved through Elias like a ghost and then broke on something harder. He did not kneel. He lifted the musket he had carried through winters of debt and graves and leveled it with hands that no longer shook for anyone's applause. "Not again," Elias said. 2 words. A lifetime. He didn't fire. Not yet. He advanced instead, step by measured step, forcing the corporal backward through his own theater. Hargrove's heel struck a fallen beam. His pistol jerked, spat high, tore a splinter from a doorframe and nothing more. The mask slipped. The predator's eyes showed the boy he had never outgrown. He glanced, quick as a rat, toward the rear egress. Jonas's chain already lay coiled there, teeth bright. The way out had learned to bite. Outside, officers rallied a line and ordered volleys into fog. Bullets thudded harmless into sodden posts. Rebecca's flood had turned marksmanship into prayer. The poor, those who had been told their place was beneath a boot, moved with the economy of harvest. They carried captives, shouldered proof, guided. Elders threw smoke, passed canteens, checked flints, and chose targets that mattered. Dignity moved like weather through the yard. It cooled rage. It fed resolve. Matthew slid past Elias toward the powder room and left a mark on the doorframe with a coal stub. Safe. A tiny mercy to those following blind. He cupped his hands and hissed toward the fissure. 2 boys squeezed through and handed out cordage like snakes made harmless. Their faces were streaked with ash and something like pride. The transformation had begun in them already. Not from violence, from purpose. Elias feinted left, drew Hargrove's aim, and heard Jonah's low call. The wheelwright had found a leva and a faulted beam. He heaved. The timber groaned. Dust fell like gray rain. Hargrove flinched. The pistol wavered. And in that tremor a nation's chance opened a finger's width. Elias stepped into it. He brought the musket stock up, not to kill, to strike the wrist that had signed cruelty with lead. Bone cracked. The pistol clattered. The corporal screamed a thin, angry sound that shrank him further. "Pick him up," an officer roared, voice breaking. "For the general?" The general's name wafted over the courtyard like perfume poured on rot. A few soldiers obeyed out of habit, then fell back under volleys that came not from hatred, but from necessity. Others hesitated, weighed coin against conscience, and put their hands in the air. Deserters who had mocked peasants at supper now begged those same peasants for quarter. Decisions made men. Elias stared into Hargrove's face and saw the revelation that had chased him since the marsh. Tyranny is theater propped by papers and fear. Remove either, and the stage creaks. He felt no triumph, only gravity. "You will answer," he said, "to mothers and to graves." He bound the corporal's hands with cord cut from the chest of ribbons. The knot was not neat. It did not need to be. Justice rarely is. A bell clanged from Stonebrook 2 strokes. The second lantern at the loft flared blue behind glass. The general's coach near reinforcements. The yard stiffened. Hope drew close, eyes wide but fire-bright. Rebecca pressed the letter's copy to Elias's chest. "We have what we came for," she said. "Proof. Lives." Jonah hauled the beam into a brace, buying breaths, not minutes. Matthew touched the powder room once more to be sure. Then he pointed to the smokehouse gate. "That way." Before the road fills with sabers, Elias looked beyond the walls, through the thinning haze to the line of pines where the poor waited with blankets and bread, to the press where type would bite lead into truth, to the ravine where the old man with the cane stood guard on ruined tracks. The journey bent here, not finished, bent. Sacrifice would be tallied by nightfall in ways none of them wished. But the hidden truth already stood in daylight. They were not subjects. They were a people. He gave the only order that fit honor and survival. Out by pairs. Carry the wounded. Carry the letter. Carry the trophies back to hands that will wear them for remembrance, not display. He shouldered Hargrove forward, not as spoil, as evidence. Smoke thinned. The gate gaped. Snow whispered. And beyond it, the road waited like a page about to receive a line none of their ancestors had dared to write. He tried to make himself smaller than his crimes. Edward Hargrove crabbed backward through soot, pistol lost, hands up, words spilling like cheap coins. Gold, he rasped. Safe. Conduct. My father will, the promise rotted in the air. Elias did not move at the first glimmer of bribe. He saw another dawn instead. The village square, the musket mouth to his skull, the boot grinding his neck into earth. The laughter, the ledger. The ritual of disgrace performed his policy. Memory steadied his breath. Hunger for revenge was there, burning hard, but something older held the reins. Justice must stand where wrath wants to run. Around them the yard shuddered with retreat. Rebecca's flood still drowned the west track. Jonah's chain still barred the cleft. Matthew's knife had silenced the cave's throat. Captives stumbled toward the alder line wrapped in shawls. Hope walked among them carrying the sack of trophies taken from a locked chest ribbons, rings, braids. Proof heavy as lead. Proof the crown had tried to list under necessary measures. Abigail guided a limping girl with both hands, murmuring the kind of strength mothers speak across centuries. Elias stepped, closer to the cornered corporal. The little man's eyes brightened with a predator's old trick. He thought he saw mercy coming to kneel. "You're not like us," Edward hissed, spotting what he mistook for softness. "You talk of dignity. Be dignified. Spare me. I can make the general forget this." He lifted his chin as if the family name were a flag. "We can fix your debts. Restore your farm, see? We can arrange transformation for your fortune." "Transformation," Elias repeated, tasting the word like iron. He let the musket's muzzle drift from the corporal's forehead to his chest and lower, down to the redcoat stained with gravel and smoke. "You call degradation policy. You call plunder law. You call the sale of daughters the king's will." He glanced past Hargrove to the pocket of shadow where the servant's path cut open to cold light. He pictured the grave on Ironwood Road, the char, the blue ribbon on his wrist, the furnace of humiliation that had hardened his marrow into oath. Hargrove grinned, thin and feral. "You won't do it," he taunted. "You'll posture, preach, then yield to fear. Men like you always bow." He flicked a glance toward the cave, calculating, seeking any door. "My father," he never finished. Elias did not need another promise of favors shaped like chains. "We fight soldiers," Elias said, voice level. "You prey on the helpless. No sermon. Verdict. This is for hope," he added, the words quiet and unarguable, "and for every grave we passed." He lowered the musket to the place where the coat met the heart. Thunder walked the stone. The cave swallowed the echo. Then silence. Not the hush of cowardice, the pause nations take before speaking a new name. Edward Hargrove slumped into the dust he had made of others, a small body beneath a heavy account. No cheer rose. None was wanted. Mercy had not been abandoned. It had been placed back in its true seat, with the innocent, not the wolf. For a long breath smoke threaded the hall like gray ribbon. The world felt rearranged. Elias stared at the fallen shape, and did not feel clean, but he felt honest. Sacrifice always leaves ash. He wiped the barrel with torn linen, and looked to Matthew. The boy's face was pale under soot, but his hands were steady. He had already turned from the body to the powder room, checking cords again, refusing spectacle. That refusal marked the difference between vengeance and defense. Outside, officers tried to rally on a name that no longer answered. The second. Lantern burned in the loft, blew through glass. The general's coach closer. Wheels clattered like a bad prophecy. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, hair damp with river spray, compass in her fist, eyes bright with decision. "The West Lane is ours," she said. For a moment, Jonah shouldered into view, carrying a brace from the fallen gate. Behind him, two farmhands hauled a wounded deserter, whose breath whistled like a reed. Abigail pressed a cloth against the lad's side and tied it with a strip of her own shawl. Hope, still clutching the sack of proof, set her jaw, and took a girl's hand, as if linking lives into a chain stronger than iron. Elias moved. He ordered no celebration. He called for pairs, for quiet, for the press, for the elder with the cane to stand at the ravine and count every child who crossed with breath and name intact. He told Matthew to mark safe doors with coal for the minute of return they might yet need. He handed the corporal's pistol to the deserter who had shown them the fissure. Carry it empty, he said, as a reminder of what fear made you serve. Let your next act serve something else. The boy nodded, face new with shame and resolve. They lifted the sack of trophies onto the shoulders of women who would know each ribbon, each ring, each lock, not to brandish, to return, to lay in hands that would weep and rise in the same hour. Dignity travels by such routes, quiet and unstoppable as thaw. At the yard's edge, a noble in fur tried to parley with the old vocabulary. He spoke of order. He warned of consequences. He named statutes no hungry child had ever seen. Elias answered him with a letter taken from a deserter's pocket, the general's seal bright even under soot. He held it high enough for every eye between gate and well to behold the design that had turned cruelty into duty. Revealing is a kind of fire. Faces changed in that light. A few redcoats lowered muskets. A factor backed away as if the page itself might bite. The hidden truth had stepped into daylight. No return to ignorance would be possible now. They moved for the smokehouse gate. The road beyond glimmered with frost and risk. Hooves hammered from the east. Drums ticked like impatient hearts. The coach would arrive with Polish and sabers, with papers that called ruin necessary. The struggle would not end at one fallen tyrant. Empire multiplies its faces. Elias knew this. Everyone in that yard knew it. Independence is not a single shout. It is a long walk on torn feet. He paused at the threshold and looked back once. The manor's windows reflected a thin sun, cold as coin. He saw on the floor the smear where he had stood years ago under a boot. He felt the kneeling loosen in his bones, not erased, transformed. Shame had been buried on the ironwood road, and over it they had planted a vow. That vow breathed now through every mouth that had refused to cheer, through every hand that carried another's weight, through every eye that did not look away from proof. Rebellion had a shape, a people choosing to be human under pressure designed to grind humanity to dust. They poured through the gate in pairs. Rebecca led the line along the alder ditch where water muffled steps. Jonah and two men dragged the brace to seize the hinge behind them. Matthew ghosted the rear with a coil of cord across his chest and coal in his fist to sketch signs only their side could read. Hope and Abigail kept the freed girls between them, a moving hearth in a winter of steel. Elias took the middle, the place where a break can be mended fastest, the place where a leader feels both edges of the blade. On the rise, the schoolmaster broke from cover with the letter tucked under his coat and the typecase clacking at his hip. He would run to stone and ink. He would set betrayal in lines no whip could tear. He raised a hand once, not as farewell, as covenant. Elias answered with a nod and felt the future lean closer by a finger's breadth. Hooves split the frost at the far bend, trumpets glinted. The coach approached like a verdict wrapped in velvet. Between the pines, villagers gathered delders, women with baskets, boys too thin for drums. Bread waited on a cloth, blankets hung over arms. Powder horns passed discreetly from sleeve to sleeve. Liberty had learned to carry soup and flint in the same hand. Elias did not pray for an easy road. He asked only for a straight heart. He looked down at the blue ribbon on his wrist and at the musket scar on its stock and understood why he could not be bought. Some debts are paid only by standing when the world demands knees. Decisions lay ahead, when to hold a line, when to fade, what to publish, whom to trust, how to keep the fire that purifies from becoming the blaze that consumes. The journey wanted more of them than blood. It wanted character, patience, endurance. The first sabers flashed as riders crowned the hill. Snow sifted from boughs in the cold light. A bell told far off one, then another Stonebrook, waking to a day that would not hide. Elias raised his hand, and the line settled into the timbered path where tracks vanish fast. He did not look back at the body by the cave. The reckoning had been made, not as spectacle, but as sentence carried out under a flag that had not yet been sown. Ahead, a nation waited to be argued into existence with courage and restraint, with proof and mercy, with the hard labor of people who had been told they were less and had decided otherwise. Right, the flame of freedom lives in me. They reached Stonebrook at noon, the sky a hard, clean blue that made smoke look like ink on a page. Hope stepped from the line and into Abigail's arms. No trumpet, no cheer. A mother held a daughter the way a nation holds its first breath after drowning. Elias turned away from the embrace, not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered so much it could burn the plan to ash if he stared too long. Freedom needs room. Grief needs witness. He let the village have both. On the green, Rebecca climbed the meeting stone with the map case pressed to her ribs. Faces gathered, farmers with chapped knuckles, widows with flour on their sleeves, elders leaning on sticks, boys who had carried water at dawn to warm frozen loaf. Soldiers watched from doorways with the helplessness of men who have tasted a different story and cannot spit it out. Rebecca broke the seal and read, not with flourish, with weight. Each line of the general's order fell like a hammer tolerate. His forays break colonial will, record, not remedy. Betrayal was not a slip, it was instruction. A murmur went through the crowd, not outrage only, something older, recognition. The hidden truth had a signature. The magistrate tried to bark the words down. Sedition, he said, rings bright on hands that had never lifted winter wood. The schoolmaster stepped from the press shed and lifted the first printed sheet, still damp letters bitten deep. He did not shout either. He raised the page so even those at the edge could read. Women took copies and passed them like bread. Men traced the lines with fingers that had learned ledgers the hard way. A graybeard squared his shoulders. A kneeling habit let go of his spine the way ice lets go of a river at thaw. Elias walked past them toward Ironwood's mouth. The cave still breathed the sour of powder, the bitter of fear, the cold of stone that had hosted crimes beneath polite talk. He would not leave it as a shrine to rage. He would turn it into record. Jonah and two lads rolled the kegs down the slope, not to hoist, to bury. A hole was cut where roots drank dark water. Powder sank into earth under shovelfuls paced like prayer. Matthew spaded steady, face set, lips moving with names he would not say aloud. Abigail stood at the rim and pressed a ribbon of cloth into the soil before the last layer fell. Not to decorate, to mark. Elias set a pole upright where the ground was stiff. Not tall, honest. A length of wood planed by a carpenter's hand, the kind his father would have chosen for a fence post that keeps stock safe in storm. He tied the torn blue ribbon at its tip. It flapped once, a small sound against wide sky. Not a banner of conquest, a vow. Humiliation would live here no more. Disgrace would be spoken and buried, not rehearsed by those in power for sport. The ribbon's color carried the memory of a cottage burned and a child whispered into earth. It also carried a future none of them had seen, and all of them now owed. Villagers pressed closer. No one asked for triumph. The poor know the price of early celebration. Elias turned and faced them, hat in his hands, ash on his sleeve. The general's letter folded once in his pocket like a coal that would start 1,000 hearths. I will not pretend we've won, he said, voice level. We have done one thing properly. We have named what was done to us as wrong, and we have refused to become wolves. The struggle is not over. The road is long. The cost will be tallied in nights and names, but our children will not inherit a tradition of kneeling. A murmured amen met him. Not from a pulpit, from throats that had begged bread and were done with begging. The deserter who had carried the letter stood apart, head bowed. Matthew placed the empty pistol in his hands again, as ordered. Carry it as a weight, he told the boy. Let it pull you toward decent work. The lad looked up with eyes that had learned more in a day than a drill yard could teach in a year. I will, he said, in minute. Rebecca stepped down from the stone. The presses will run until candle ends, she said to the schoolmaster. Set type for names we recovered. Print the testimonies. Print the oath. She glanced at Elias, and he nodded. Oaths make a people. Paper helps memory keep its shape. Truth walks faster with copies in hand. By the well, a noble in fur approached, with a smile practiced on dockside victims. He offered reconciliation, spoke of unfortunate excess, of the need to restore balance. He tried to shake Elias's hand. Elias did not raise his palm. There is no balance, he said. There is domination, and there is liberty. Choose. The noble's smile faltered as if a draft had found his fine coat. He retreated to his carriage and scribbled a note he would send a priver. Another piece of paper seeking to wrap policy in perfume. The county would answer with its own pages. The captives sat on blankets and drank broth from scorched cups. Hope moved among them. With quiet steps, returning rings and ribbons, as if mending a torn world thread by thread. Some women wept. Others set their mouths and looked toward the ridge where the general's coach had glinted, and then vanished at the sight of a people who would not scatter. An elder touched the new pole and whispered the word dignity, as if tasting a fruit she had not seen since girlhood. Elias felt the town realign around the green. The old habit of looking to great houses for instruction loosened. Heads turned instead to mothers holding evidence, to a schoolmaster stained with ink, to a wheelwright whose hands spoke clearer than any judge, to a farm boy who had cut fuses without tragedy, to a mapmaker who could turn creaks into allies. Authority migrated. It did not need coats or drums. It needed character. Near evening they walked back to Ironwood to finish what the day had opened. The grave of powder lay smooth. The pole stood. The ribbon moved like a vein against the sky. Elias ran his fingers over the musket stock, the notches father had carved to count seasons, not kills. He thought of the boot that had crushed him, and of the moment when he did not kneel. He thought of the letter, and how design had been masked as discipline. He thought of the county's children, and the work it would take to build a place where a cottage fire meant warmth, not warning. The general would come, with papers, with sabers, with noble friends who called hunger an unfortunate feature of policy. He would come with wagons and fresh coats and words that sounded like law because they were printed in London ink. Elias did not fear it. He feared only the flicker inside his own camp, the temptation to turn cruelty into answer, to let rage choose targets that conscience should spare. That was the next trial. To hold the line without losing the soul that made the line worth holding. To be hard without becoming hollow. They posted watches not with rank but with trust. The elder took the first hour. At the ravine, Matthew lay under the alder bank with coal ready. Rebecca marked the floodgates on her chart and wrote beside them 3 words: "Keep mercy open." Jonah mended a broken wheel for a widow, because liberty that doesn't fix what is cracked is performance, not pledge. Abigail made tea that tasted of smoke and hope. Hope herself sat by the pole and watched the ribbon shift, guarding it as if it were a candle in wind. Elias stood at the edge of the green and looked along the road that had brought them here, kneeling in mud, burial in snow. A mother's knock at a militia gate, a plan whispered over stew, a cave turned into record, a shot that ended a ritual of shame. He measured the journey ahead, longer, harder, worth it. The county had found its voice. It would need patience for the echo to reach the coast and climb aboard boats and cross oceans of law. Night took the edges of roofs and turned the ribbon into a dark line against darker sky. The pole did not look grand. It looked stubborn. That was enough. Elias breathed cold air deeper than his old fear and felt the transformation hold. No man could buy him. No paper could unmake what a people had decided. A wooden post and a strip of cloth had become a covenant. Hooves sounded far off where the road bends toward the river. Not an army yet. The first scout. Choices gathered like weather on the horizon. Elias touched the ribbon not once, then lifted his musket, not as a threat, as a reminder of duty. "We are not wolves," he had said in the ashes. Tonight the vow gained teeth, not for prey, for protection. The county stood, not tall, but together. The pole stood on the Ironwood road, plain wood with a ribbon torn and trembling against the winter sky. No gilded crest, no banner stitched by noble hands. Only the color of a child's hair tie, salvaged from ash, lifted by calloused fingers, and bound there as a covenant. Men and women gathered around it with faces that had learned hunger, labor, contempt. They did not cheer. They stood in silence, because silence, when chosen, can thunder louder than muskets. That ribbon was not victory. It was memory, turned into oath. It marked the moment when the poor ceased being subjects and began to live as a people. Elias Turner watched them, his musket resting like a staff, his breath slow and deliberate. He thought of the graves, of the mothers who had buried sons with no compensation but shame, of the children stolen under the pretense of law, of his own humiliation swallowed years ago in mud. That old disgrace had been transformed into fuel, no longer a wound but a forge. From his shame had risen a vow carried now by every neighbor standing upright in the frost. Liberty was no longer a dream whispered at night. It was a flame lit in daylight, fragile yet fierce, a fire that would demand sacrifice but would not be extinguished by threats or coins. The journey ahead would be cruel. More sabers would come, more decrees sealed in wax, more attempts to buy obedience with promises of safety. But the county had found its spine. They had proof in their hands, they had dignity in their eyes, and they had chosen rebellion not as savagery, but as survival. What began with a carpenter's son forced to kneel now stood taller than any general's house. The hidden truth was no longer hidden. No empire can long rule a people who decide that their humanity is not for sale. The ribbon cracked once in the wind, and every head turned toward it as though it were a signal. Hope touched her mother's arm. Rebecca lowered her compass. Jonah set aside his hammer. Matthew wiped coal from his fingers. Abigail held her daughter close. Each had given something. Each had changed. The transformation was not only Elias's. It belonged to them all. It would belong to their children. From ashes, from blood, from shame endured too long, the flame of independence had been struck into life. And you who hear this story carry its echo. If it moved you, hold it as they held that ribbon, as they guarded that pole on a cold winter road. Keep it alive by remembering, by standing, by sharing in this bond of sacrifice and dignity. Leave your mark below with the words, "The flame of freedom burns in me." Or say, "I stand with the Patriots until the end." Let the vow stretch beyond the county, beyond the graves, into every listening heart. The fire does not end here. It moves on, into other nights of courage, other stories of defiance written in blood and frost. Here is another story of sacrifice and honor. Click and walk with me into the next chapter of our struggle.